order for some of us to wake up, we need a wake-up call. And in 1986, I got the call. I was in a triathlon in Palm Springs, California, and I was in the biking portion of the race. And I was coming up to this intersection, and there were two cyclists that were turning onto another road. And there was a police officer that was standing on the opposite side, and he was pointing at me, and he was telling me to turn and to merge onto this road. And so I was locked in on him, and I wasn't paying attention to the road. And the problem was he had his back to the oncoming traffic. So as I made the turn, a four-wheel drive Bronco going about 55 miles an hour hit me from behind and catapulted me out of my bicycle. And I landed on my lower back and my buttocks. And when you land very hard, the compressive force basically puts a downward pressure on the vertebrae. And the compressive force compressed 6 vertebrae in my spine. The 8th thoracic vertebrae, the 9th thoracic vertebrae, 10, 11, 12, and the first lumbar vertebrae. And when you compress volume like that, the matter has to go somewhere. And in my case, it went back towards my spinal cord. One of the vertebrae, the 8th thoracic vertebrae, was more than 60% collapsed, and the neural arch, where the spinal cord passed through, had broken like a pretzel. So I had multiple compression fractures of my thoracic spine and upper lumbar spine. I had bone fragments on my spinal cord, and I had compression of the cord because of the neural arch being fractured. And so they took me to the hospital, and I had 4 opinions from 4 of the leading surgeons in Southern California, and the prognosis was I'd probably never walk again, and that I needed a radical surgery called the Harrington rod surgery. And in Harrington rod surgery, they basically cut off the back parts of your vertebrae. They screw in these long stainless steel rods. And by screwing those rods in there, they cantilever and pull the spinal column off the spinal cord, and it opens up the pathway. And then they take bone fragments from your hip and they paste it over the top, and they hope for the best. So in my case, it would be from the base of my neck to the base of my spine because of the number of vertebrae that were compressed. And so I think that if this had been anybody else, I probably would have recommended that they have the surgery. But this was me. And I wasn't so quick, based on the x-rays and the CAT scans and MRIs, to just decide to have the surgery. And so I think one of the biggest things about making a choice when you're indecisive, it's one of the difficult times because you're weighing what you know against what you don't know. And you reach this point in your life where it's like a dark night of the soul, because when you realize that nobody has the answers to your problems but you, then you start this process of stepping out into the unknown. Now, in 1986, in Southern California, not a lot of people were going against convention, whether it was scientific convention or medical convention or social convention or religious convention. But I think that when you step outside of a convention, that's the definition of a miracle. So when you do something like that, you're always considered foolhardy or insane until you pull it off, and then you're a saint or a mystic or a genius. So I decided for myself personally that I was willing to step out into the unknown, that I couldn't imagine myself living on addictive medications for the rest of my life or being in a wheelchair. And so I decided to check out of the hospital. And I just had this one thought, and the thought was the power that made the body heals the body. And I couldn't stop thinking about that because I knew that there's an intelligence that's giving us life that keeps our heart beating and digesting our food. And that consciousness is awareness, and awareness is paying attention. So it must be observing or paying attention to who I am. So I decided that I was going to make contact with this intelligence. And I was going to give it a plan, a template, a design. I was going to get very specific on what I wanted. And when I was happy with my creation, I was going to surrender this creation to a greater mind because it knows how to heal way better than I do. And the second thing I said was I'm not going to let any thought slip by my awareness that I don't want to experience. Now, this sounds really easy from an intellectual standpoint, But I learned very quickly that I couldn't get my mind to do what I wanted it to do. And when we're in crisis or trauma, like I was, we tend to focus on what we don't want to have happen instead of what we do want to have happen. So out of the infinite potentials that exist for us as human beings, I was selecting the worst case scenario over and over again in my mind and embracing that emotionally and being prepared for that event, because if anything less happened, I would have better chances of survival. And I think when we're in crisis, it's those survival chemicals, those hormones of stress that prepare us for the worst case scenario. So I would start off in my mind reconstructing my spine vertebrae per vertebrae, and then I'd start thinking about living in a wheelchair. And then I'd become aware that I was focusing on what I don't want to have happen instead of what I do want to have happen, and I'd stop and realize that I'd have to start all over. And the reason being was because this intelligence is a presence. And just like when you know someone is present with you, they're paying attention to you, and you know when they're not, and they're distracted. So I reasoned that I had to be completely present with it, and it had to get a very clear signal, a very clear plan. So I would start all over again and start reconstructing my spine, and then I'd start thinking about, should I sell my home, should I sell my practice? And I'd stop again, become conscious, and then I'd get frustrated, and then I'd get impatient, and then I'd get angry, and then it would just get worse. And so for 6 weeks, I went through this incredible dark night of the soul because I couldn't really get my mind to do what I wanted it to do. And it would take me about 3 hours in closing my eyes and reconstructing every single vertebrae and starting over again every time I lost my attention. And then I was never satisfied really with the way it was, way I did it, but I would just keep going. At the end of 6 weeks, I went through the whole entire process without losing my attention. And it was like I hit a tennis ball in the sweet spot. Something clicked in that moment. I clicked. And I knew in that moment that something happened. And what was taking me 3 hours to do, I was able to do in 45 minutes. And at the time, I didn't know it, but I was firing and wiring new circuits in my brain every single day. And I was literally improving my ability to pay attention. And attention is a skill, just like golf or tennis. The more you practice it, the better you get at it. So I wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't doing anything. I was basically laying face down, and I had a lot of time on my hands, so this was the object of my affection. At that time, when I was able to go through that whole rehearsal, I started noticing significant changes in my body. My pain levels dropped and diminished immediately. Some of the neurological problems I was having were improving. Numbness, tingling, my motor function started coming back. And the moment I correlated what I was doing inside of me with the effect that I was producing outside of me, I started paying attention to what I was doing and did it with more passion and more enthusiasm instead of dread and frustration. And it was that elevated emotion that I started to realize that was actually the catalyst to make it fun and easy. And then I just started thinking about if I was ever able to walk again, what did I take for granted, like a sunset or a shower or sitting with my friends and enjoying a meal. And all of a sudden, I started selecting potentials in the quantum field that were no longer based on the worst-case scenario, but really some future possibility. And I began to emotionally embrace and experience it completely. Whether it was a sunset on the beach or a shower, I would live it and emotionally feel it. And I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but I think when you combine a clear intention with an elevated emotion, you move your body and brain from living in the past to living in the future. And the brain and body actually don't know the difference when you're truly focused and paying attention between what's going on in your outer world and what's going on in your inner world. And the very process of the elevated emotion began to convince my body that I was living in that future reality in the present moment, because the body's the unconscious mind that doesn't know the difference. That I began to signal new genes in new ways, and my body began to change dramatically. And I was back on my feet in 10 weeks, and back training again at 12 weeks, and I'd never have any pain in my body or in my back. And I just made a deal with myself, and the deal was with this intelligence that if I was ever able to walk again, I'd spend the rest of my life studying the mind-body connection and mind over matter, and pretty much that's what I've been doing since 1986.
Amazing. I was just going to have you do kind of a overview of how our thoughts and emotions affect our biology.
Okay.
And can either create disease or return us back to health, homeostasis.
Okay. So, one of the privileges of being a human being is that we can make thought more real than anything else, and we do it all the time. And because of the size of the frontal lobe is the creative center. It's the crowning achievement of the human being. It's 40% of our entire brain. That's the workshop. That's the place where we imagine, we speculate, we create, we intend, we have attention, we restrain emotional reactions, we decide who we're going to be. And that part of the brain is where our conscience sits. And when we begin to think about a better way of being, a new possibility in our life, that forebrain begins to turn on. And because it has connections to all other parts of the brain, like a symphony leader, it begins to call up different networks of neurons from knowledge we've gained in the past or experiences that we've had, and seamlessly pieces them together to create a vision. We call that intent. And when we begin to combine new networks of neurons firing in new sequences and new patterns and new combinations, we begin to change our mind, because mind is the brain in action. So we naturally do this. We naturally begin to think about a new way of being. The problem is that most people don't combine that intention with an elevated emotion. The moment you begin to experience that future reality in the present moment, the end product of an experience is called a feeling or an emotion. And the body begins to believe it's living in that future reality. The repetition of that cycle over time begins to fire and wire new circuits in new ways to cause your brain to look like the experience has already occurred. The elevated emotion tends to signal the body in actively instructing and selecting new genes to make new proteins to prepare the body for the event. So, why is that important? The significance of that is that the brain is organized to reflect everything you know in your life. Your brain is a record of the past. It's an artifact of everything you've learned and experienced to this moment. So if you're waking up every single morning and you come back to your senses and you go through a series of routine behaviors and choices and experiences that were exactly like yesterday, you see the same people, you go to the same places, you do the exact same things at the exact same time. It's your external environment that's turning on different circuits in your brain, causing you to think and feel equal to everything that you know. Now, if you believe that your thoughts have something to do with your health or your destiny, as long as you're thinking the same way, you keep creating the same life. So then, if the brain is a record of the past, then most people who are not being defined by a vision of the future are left with the old memories of the past, and so they think in the past. And if feelings and emotions are the end product of past experiences, and we can remember experiences better because we can remember how we feel, if you're waking up every single morning feeling the exact same way as you did days before, number one, it means nothing new is happening in your life. And if those feelings and emotions that are the end product of past experiences drive your very thoughts and your very behaviors, then you're thinking and acting in the past and you'll become predictable. So then if those emotions are driving certain thoughts, and those thoughts are creating certain emotions, and those emotions are driving certain thoughts, the repetition of that cycle of thinking and feeling begins to create a state of being. In other words, thoughts are the language of the brain, and feelings are the language of the body. And how you think and how you feel creates a state of being. So most people have experiences in their life that brand them emotionally. They feel fear, they feel anger, they feel bitterness, they feel frustration, they feel insecurity. And those emotions then become part of their identity. So once they think certain thoughts that turn on certain circuits in their brain that are equal to their insecurity, and then they feel insecure. The moment they feel insecure, they think more insecure thoughts, which makes more chemicals for them to feel insecure. And the repetition of that cycle over time conditions the body to subconsciously become the mind of insecurity. So then the person says, I am insecure. And whenever you say, I am anything, you're commanding your mind and body towards a destiny. So then most people's biology is, for the most part, their past. And so if you're not being defined by the vision of the future, some new possibility in your life, you're only left with the old circuitry in your brain and the old emotions of the past. So the question then is, can you believe in a future that you can't see or experience with your senses yet, but you've thought about enough times in your mind that your brain is literally changed to look like the experience has already occurred? Now, the latest research in neuroscience says you can change your brain just by thinking. So then, as you begin to think about a new possibility, and your brain begins to fire in new sequences and new patterns and new combinations, and you begin to plan your behaviors, and you begin to review in your mind, mentally rehearse who you're going to be in your life, the mere action of mental rehearsal begins to install the neurological circuits in your brain, the hardware, to look like the event has already occurred. If you keep revisiting that same thought and that same sequence, the hardware becomes a software program. Now your brain is no longer a record of the past. Now it's in fact a map to the future. And if you were then to begin to emotionally embrace your future before it's made manifest, in other words, you're not waiting for your healing to feel wholeness. You're not waiting for your new relationship to feel love. You're not waiting for the mystical moment to feel awe. You're not waiting for your success to feel empowered. That's the old model of reality, of cause and effect. Waiting for something outside of us to change how we feel inside of us. And then when we feel differently inside of us, we pay attention to whoever or whatever caused that. That's a memory. That's how we create associative memories. But this model is about causing an effect, which means you have to feel awe for the mystical moment to occur. You have to become empowered in order to create your success. You have to feel wholeness in order for your healing to occur. We have to feel love for ourselves and love for life in order for us to have love in our life. And so then to instruct people how to teach their body emotionally how that future could feel like before it's made manifest, if they do it properly, their body as the unconscious mind begins to believe it's living in that future reality in the present moment. And they're beginning to signal new genes in new ways that begins to change their body to look like the event has already occurred. So can you then select a new potential in the quantum field, infinite potentials in the quantum field, and begin to emotionally embrace that future reality before it's made manifest to such a degree that your body as the unconscious mind is believing it's living in that future reality in the present moment, and you're changing your body by thought alone. Now, if there's physical evidence, neurologically, biologically, chemically, genetically, in your brain and body to look like the experience has already occurred, then relax, because the experience is going to find you. And it's going to come in a way that you least expect. Now, this is the significance of that. It has to come in a way that we least expect, because if we can expect it, it's nothing new. It's more of the known. It has to catch us off guard. It has to surprise us, and it has to leave no doubt that what we've done inside of us produces some effect outside of us. And when we can correlate the changes we've made inside of us with the effects we've produced outside of us, we pay attention to what we've done and we do it again. And that's called human empowerment. And I don't think there's a person in the world that's so special to be excluded from this phenomenon. So, common people around the world right now are doing the uncommon, because I think this is a time in history where it's not enough to know. This is a time in history to know how. And if you can combine the latest research in quantum physics with neuroscience and neuroplasticity and neuroendocrinology and psychoneuroimmunology and epigenetics, all of those sciences point the finger at possibility. And so learning it is one thing. That's philosophy. It's theory. It's knowledge. It's analytical information. But when you take that information and you apply it, you personalize it, you demonstrate it, it means you're going to have to initiate some actions. And when you begin to change your behaviors, and you can get your behaviors to match your intentions, you are going to have a new experience. Now, philosophy, learning information, creates new synaptic connections in the brain. That's what learning is. Learning is forging new circuits. Remembering is maintaining them. But when you take that philosophical information and you begin to apply it to your life, if you do it properly, you should have a new experience. And the new experience then, through all of the sensory feedback from your environment, begins to enrich the circuits in your brain. And when those circuits string into place, the brain makes a chemical, and that chemical is called a feeling or an emotion. The moment you feel the emotion from the experience, now you're teaching your body chemically to understand what your mind has intellectually understood. So we could say that knowledge is for the mind and experience is for the body. And in that moment, you're embodying that philosophy. You're embodying the truth of that knowledge. And that's when you begin to upregulate new genes and downregulate old genes, and you begin to rewrite the program. Which means the book on compassion is no longer theory. You're feeling compassionate. The book on leadership is no longer philosophical information. You're becoming a leader. The book on a patient parent is no longer just about some conversation about how you're going to be more patient. You actually feel like you're overcoming your impatience. So if you're able to do that once, then you should be able to reproduce it. And if you can reproduce it over and over again, the same experience, you will begin to neurochemically condition your body to know how to do it as well as your mind. And when your body knows as well as your mind, or the mind and body merge as one, now it's innate in you. It's who you are. It's second nature. You've done it so many times that you no longer have to consciously think about it. It's become a subconscious program. And now you're memorizing an internal neurochemical order that's greater than any condition in your external environment. And that's when you begin to master that philosophy. So our job, I think, is to go from philosopher to initiate to master, from knowledge to experience to wisdom, from mind to body to soul, and from thinking to doing to being. And we have all the biological and neurological machinery to do this.